Hello and welcome to In Pursuit of. My guest today is Kartik Desai, founder of Desai and Associates and former head of Asha Impact. And Kartik is in pursuit of.
I am in pursuit of helping to transfer wealth from those who have it in abundance and are willing to share to those who need it and can deploy it in the most efficient and effective way.
How do you pursue this and how do you ensure that wealth goes from people who understand, who have and who understand and are willing and goes to the right hands? How do you do that?
So capital has different sources. Firstly, you have equity, you have debt, which are commercial types of capital, and then you have grants, which is philanthropic capital. You have different types of financial providers, different types of commercial investors, foundations, banks and NBFCs, and of course, family offices and HNIs. Now, different people who provide capital have different thought processes, different objectives. And similarly, at the recipient end, there's no shortage of recipients, as you just suggested. They're not-for-profits, they're for-profits, they're social enterprises, they're numerous sectors, there's different scales of projects. So what constitutes an effective project? And therefore, the type of capital that is, that someone is looking to give and the type of capital that someone is looking to receive to intermediate that. That essentially, in theory, is what myself and many others who work in social capital markets broadly do. We try to figure out how to channel that capital. It's being done on a mixed basis, sometimes commercial, sometimes philanthropic, sometimes mixed, which is why we call it the capital spectrum and different types of innovative capital. Innovative just mean using capital for a non-traditional purpose.
Right. So when you say innovative capital, innovative finance, what does that mean and what does that not mean also? Because I think people possibly think of it as many more things than it is, possibly.
Yes, and I'm conscious of the fact that much of this is jargon or nomenclature or just acronyms. Words like CSR, ESG, sustainable, green. We've all heard about these words.
We use them a lot.
We use them a lot, and
Many times not knowing them.
So let me lay out what we call the innovative capital spectrum or the spectrum of capital from left to right. On the left, you have greater impact, and on the right, you have greater financial returns. So there's a trade-off. So on the right, you have something known as ESG, environmental, social, and governance. That is when corporations add a certain environmental or social layer to their work, but it's still primarily commercial. And all the way on the left, you have philanthropy or venture philanthropy or public finance, which is government money, which is not seeking a return. It's purely there to seek impact. Now, that's normally all you have, commercial capital, and, philanthropic and public capital. But now in between, you have, let's say, three segments, which I'd like to lay out. One of them is impact investing, which has been around for about 25, 30 years or more, which is still commercial, but it's investing commercial capital in equity for startups which are also having a social or environmental objective. Another segment is blended finance. And as the name suggests, it means mixing the philanthropic and the private side to fund projects which don't have a commercial return, but are still above zero, so which are muted returns. And the third type of investing is what's known as outcomes finance, which is, again, to fund NGOs, so more on the philanthropic side, but to make it in a more accountable way. So these, therefore, become the segments: ESG, impact investing, blended finance, outcomes finance, venture philanthropy. And on top of that, you have certain thematic cuts. For example, climate investing. Climate investing can be any of these: climate tech, impact investing, climate philanthropy, climate ESG, gender-based investing, technology-based investing.
So Kartik, what's the difference between outcome-based finance and venture philanthropy?
It's a great question. So venture philanthropy, firstly, we have to distinguish it from traditional philanthropy. It's that classic notion of teaching a person to fish versus giving him a fish. So think of a food kitchen. As a philanthropist, many families will give money to feed people every year. That is an expenditure. But now imagine you actually invest some money to build a food kitchen with some capital expenditure, and you maybe charge people for a certain amount for a plate. So it becomes a model which is more like a venture. Ashoka University is a self-sustainable institution. So it's not just an expenditure of capital. Exactly that example that they give in the Bible and many other places, that you give a person a fishing rod, they're able to help themselves, versus having to catch a fish each time and give it to them.
Right.
Outcome-based financing is just simply means, as the name suggests, you only pay when the outcome is met. So philanthropy is still sometimes criticized because it's activity-based. You're funding an NGO to carry out certain activities, unsure of whether the learning levels will go up or the healthcare levels will go up. Outcome-based financing says that we will only pay that money when the outcome is met. And the NGO receives that interim working capital from an external investor. So the external investor finances an NGO in a pre-agreed way to achieve a particular outcome. If that outcome is met, only then the donor pays. So that's outcome-based financing. It's a fairly new and a radical concept.
That's quite cool, actually.
Yeah.
I think,
And that's
because
something
it
which
holds, because it creates a lot of accountability, actually,
exactly
for the NGOs.
exactly.
It's pretty phenomenal.
It also has its challenges, which we can talk about.
So when you were talking about innovative finance, when you said that these are two continuums, but are there any limitations to this? You know, because it can be only like this, or it can not be in that sector, or if it is in so and so sector, then it can create an issue.
There are certainly limitations, and I'll talk about three of them. The first and most important limitation is the definition of impact. Impact, unlike financial returns, which can be measured on the basis of revenues, profits, return on investment, is notoriously difficult to measure. And even in a sector like education, traditionally it was measured in terms of outreach. How many students are you reaching? What is the income level of those students? How underserved are they? Should it be about learning outcomes? How do you measure learning outcomes? How do you metricize these outcomes and determine payment metrics for them? So the measurement of outcomes and impact and outputs is notoriously difficult. And in innovative finance, particularly outcome finance and blended finance, you're literally paying for those outcomes. So lack of agreement, lack of standardization of impact is the biggest challenge.
Sure.
The second challenge, again, particularly in this innovative finance, less so in impact investing, which has grown considerably, is the sort of the time, the complexity, and the effort that it takes to structure these transactions. You're bringing multiple stakeholders together. There are intermediation costs involved. There's no standardization of templates and contracts. So many people say, is it really worth the effort to go through all of this? Often in some of these transactions, capital has to be raised from multiple sources. And combined with the first challenge, where the measurement of impact may not be very precise or very subjective, it's still a boutique and niche area for some. And the third, again, linked to this, is a lack of awareness. In some of these segments, again, in outcome-based finance in particular, you don't have enough donor capital because domestic capital, which is Indian philanthropic capital, still hasn't entered the space as much as foreign capital has. So in OECD countries, particularly in the United States, in the UK, and in Australia, in the English-speaking countries, it's very, very popular, this notion of impact bonds. Impact bonds have now started to come into India, but the lack of awareness amongst many stakeholders is still a limiting factor. And of course, that is starting to change as we see more and more transactions and with the effort of different ecosystem builders like my firm, like the various industry associations which are there. But these are principally the three challenges: impact measurement, lack of standardization, and therefore high cost, time, and complexity. And third, lack of awareness and a shortage of grant capital available to fund these transactions.
Right. So when you said impact measurement is an issue, I would assume that the first thing that one looks for is intent, right? That's one. Whether they're making profit or not is a secondary thing, but intent is the first thing. But at the same time, there are many things for which impact is intangible. Then how would those organizations fare in something like this? It would be really hard for them.
It's a good question. You're right that intent or intentionality is certainly what many people consider a core aspect of impact. So for example, when the impact investment industry was forming, and I was involved in the industry association, the IIC, the Impact Investors Council, we spent a lot of time debating what this definition should be. For example, someone said, why is DLF not an impactful company when it employs millions of laborers versus a small social enterprise?
That's like Barrow's philanthropy. That's the latest.
Correct.
This thing is.
So the argument was, because there was no intention to create impact.
Right.
But then the counter is, well, who measures that intention?
Absolutely.
Well, there's an answer to that, which is that like a company has a stated objective of generating profits in its charter, which it states upfront, and as measured through its annual reports and its performance, where every year it tells its shareholders its returns, social enterprises inevitably do declare their intent upfront, that we are a company, we do want to make profits, but our intent is to serve rural customers or low-income customers, or this many women, or this many underprivileged children. And every year, in addition to the annual report, they also put out an impact report. So intentionality, I would say, definitely is a core component. The other key components are the breadth and depth of impact. Breadth is simply the volume. How many underserved people are you serving? And that can also be defined in terms of income, in terms of exclusion, and so on. And depth is how much are you serving them, right? What is the level of increase in their income or in their educational level? And finally, we have to not forget about climate impact. Now, on climate, thankfully, we have a common variable, which is carbon, which can be used comparatively across many sectors, whether it's waste management, whether it's agriculture, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's electric vehicles. You can compare projects or companies A, B, C, and D in terms of what are their net carbon savings. So there are methodologies and mechanisms to capture impact. You have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which broadly lay out different thematic areas. You have something known as the Impact Management Project, IMP, which is a global coalition which lays out a broad methodology of how to think about impact and reconciles many different frameworks, proprietary consulting frameworks, which all essentially say the same thing, the who, what, where, when, and how of impact. And then you have something known as IRIS, the Impact Reporting Standards, set up by, again, one acronym after another, something called the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, which is a large global industry association of thousands upon thousands of impact funders. Coming back to conclude with your original point, how important intentionality is. You can't just keep buttoning someone down as to what exactly it is, but you know that a gender lens fund cares about gender, a climate fund cares about climate. So once they pick that thematic area, then you can ask them, okay, how are you measuring gender inclusivity? How are you measuring climate? And hold them to account on that particular aspect.
This is like such a vast topic. And I'm just thinking that, when you said there's no awareness, there's not enough awareness, about impact bonds, etc. It is complex. I mean, for most people to understand, I think. And something like this would require a lot of shifts in the government's policies to introduce certain things. So I think it would be imperative for the government also to make people aware about it. How can it be done? I think information is knowledge, is power.
Yeah.
So how can we empower social entrepreneurs more with this?
Again, your question actually hints at the solution, which is that it's not necessarily that we need specific regulatory changes, though of course those regulations are there. For example, SEBI has regulations for what are known as alternative investment funds, which invest equity capital. The RBI governs non-bank finance companies which do inclusive credit. So there are tweaks that can be made to several regulations. But it's more about the enabling environment that the government creates. And as you said, it's about awareness. When the government gets behind something, people automatically become aware of it and it becomes a bigger force to reckon with. The government is aware of this. So for example, impact investing is a subset of venture capital. It's impact-focused venture capital. There are many, regulations focusing on venture capital, the creation of the AIF system itself. The government has put in place the CSR regulations, which is to help corporates channel money towards philanthropy. So even as foreign philanthropy is reduced, corporate philanthropy in India is going up. You have this absolutely fantastic, I don't know what to call it, an innovation, a framework, a platform known as the social stock exchange, which has directly come up from the government with the participation of market participants like us, which is still evolving and being given shape. It is absolutely something mind-blowing, which everyone should learn more about, because it is a platform for different NGOs and social enterprises to raise capital. And it's a real exchange, unlike those in other countries. It's being governed by SEBI, the same regulator that governs the capital markets. But ultimately, it's about, as you said, the awareness. So the government has green taxonomy standards that it's developing. For climate reporting, it asks corporations to do something called BRSR, right? Business responsibility and sustainability reporting. In his G20 speeches, Mr. Amit Kant has mentioned blended finance, I think more than a dozen times. Blended finance has been mentioned by Ms. Sitaraman in the budget multiple times. So the government is aware of it. So it comes down to that government-private sector nexus of setting in place the committees to define the standards, to develop the social stock exchange, to figure out the regulatory tweaks that are needed. And that is all something that we are doing. Firms like mine, industry associations like the Impact Investors Council, the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, and the range of market participants. But again, you're right. The broader awareness of this can only happen when the media, the intelligentsia, and the public at large picks up on this, which is why what you are doing or other folks are doing to publicize the stories of social entrepreneurs or social finance is very valuable. And that is the knowledge building work that I also do. I teach a course on this subject at Ashoka University and several other universities, including Ambedkar and ISTM and Anant. And we create edtech content because access to knowledge of this subject has to be democratized. The Parinam platform, the conference that we and others held, to introduce this concept of outcome-based financing was precisely that.
Right.
So we have to keep pushing the knowledge out there. We have to also simplify it because we make it unnecessarily complex. And we have to work with the government to enable both the regulatory tweaks, but ultimately the government buy into this.
Right.
I mean, the final point I'll make on this is that impact investing is perfectly aligned with the national development priorities of the government of India. All the various schemes that you see, from the Jan Dhan Yojana to Make in India to Swachh Bharat, those are the very sectors impact investors focus on. Financial inclusion, waste management, affordable housing, which is the Awas scheme. So each and every segment of the development sector that impact investors are focused on is naturally aligned with these large government schemes. And finally, the technology stacks that the government of India has built, from the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile stack to the health stack that they're building to the open stack that they're building for retail. So there's a lot of stuff happening where the government can play a role. It's not just about regulation. It's about creating an enabling atmosphere. And that happens when they become very much aware of the sector and start to promote it.
Catch the second part of this episode next week only on In Pursuit Of.